What's going on, everybody? It's Rev, and welcome back to another Dauntless video. I was filming my tier list video when I caught myself talking about something that may not necessarily be true anymore now that the sword rework is live. And it led me down a rabbit hole of DPS testing that came up with some pretty interesting conclusions, and that's what this video is all about. It's been shared verbally a lot, whether it's me or other channels of information. When someone asks, what's the best sword? Most of the time, people will say, oh, it's Hellion. Well, in the early game of Dauntless, we don't have access to this weapon, and even when we do, when talking about the pre-reworked sword, it only broke even with Boreas when it reached plus 10. It wasn't until we had unlimited stamina to spam repeating elements, thanks to the Skullforge and Whistling Blade, that Hellion sword really started to beat the Boreas sword in performance. It was this fact that got me thinking, is the Hellion sword still the reigning champion of all-around best sword now that the repeating elements playstyle has kind of been banished and forgotten? And so I set off to the training grounds to find out. There needs to be a level of understanding when talking about the training grounds DPS meter. Dummy DPS is not an accurate representation of actual combat in Dauntless. However, it is good at isolating particular aspects of a build and breaking down tiny pieces of information to help rationalize an answer to a larger question. Since all I'm really looking to see here is how strong are these unique effects now for the sword, it works quite well. But there are obvious factors that I cannot replicate in the training grounds: enrages, elemental procs, knockdowns, etc. With this fact, that means that top-end builds or meta builds are not going to perform as well as they might, which also will affect the outcome of these unique effects. With that out of the way, the variables to my test are as follows. All of the swords have the same cell build: Wild Frenzy, Rage, and Predator, all at plus 6. You'll notice my character is at 50% in this test to proc low life, but I merely equipped Discipline and took it off. If you're wondering why Wild Frenzy, it's because Thrax Sword also features in this video, but it wasn't a major part of the experiment just because Thrax performs so sporadically based on build and uptime that it's really hard to get an accurate gauge in a test like this. You'd need significantly more data, and I just don't have time for all that. Furthermore, I ran multiple DPS tests. First, I ran the performance of the sword without overdrive. For these tests, I didn't really time them. I just went by the highest DPS value I could get and utilizing the same DPS rotation for all the swords. That rotation is LLL, HHH, Resounding Echo. Rinse, repeat. The results of that test were Boreas 647, Torg 701, Thrax 720. Next, I used the same parameters but weaved in overdrive at the same interval for all the tests, which looks like LLL, HHH, Resounding, LLL, HHH, Resounding, LLL, overdrive. Repeat the combo from the first test until overdrive runs out. The results of that test look like this: Boreas 973, Torg 824, Thrax 863. Now that we have a low and high-end peak performance, we put them together and take the average, and we get a value that we can assign to our unique effects, which looks like Boreas at 810, Torg 762, and Thrax 791. As you can see, Boreas on average will reliably get you more DPS so long as you're activating your overdrive, making it one of the strongest unique effects for the sword. I spent several hours beating on a dummy during this session, and through several game crashes and pondering what this all looks like on the field or in a trial, I learned quite a bit. So what did we learn? Boreas is hands down the best early game sword. This is already a known fact, but hopefully seeing this little experiment helps make it more apparent if you're a new player. It's so good now that you could probably skip over crafting Hellion weapons entirely and not worry about it until gearing up for late game or Dauntless Trials, because by the time you unlock it at the blacksmith, your Boreas sword is already going to be really close to plus 10, and even then, Boreas is still going to find use in Iceborne builds. So you might be asking yourself, Revvy, Boreas has the highest average value. Doesn't that mean it's the best sword? Not necessarily. Boreas' downfall is the fact that while its unique effect is very strong, it loses 6 points of effective cell economy worth of damage in the passive conditioning and defensive cell slot. This isn't bad for content where Iceborne really shines, but when seeking peak performance, the gap between those averages is going to lessen, and Thrax and Torgadoro will start to see better results. One thing I'm interested in, though, is when Boreas gets a legendary fusion, I'd wager that it will surpass the other swords in this test. It'll get 3 of those points back for useful perks. By that time, hopefully more information on the sword will be figured out, and maybe some new cells will come along and make that unique effect possibly more nutty than it already is. It's worth noting that Thrax sword performed very well despite having a limited build behind it. Out of all of these weapons, it's definitely the most volatile and reliant on every aspect of combat. But if you can pull it off, you can get some really explosive results. So if I had to tier the 3 currently, I'd put Boreas at number 3, for now until it gets a legendary, number 2, Torgadoro, and number 1, Thrax. But in most cases for general farming, these swords are all very close, and any of these 3 swords will get you to where you need to go in a great amount of time. So the next time someone comes to you and asks you, what's the best sword in Dauntless? Show them this video so I can tell them with utmost certainty. Well, it's actually Shroud. Shroud shits on the competition on low and high-end DPS for unique effects, and has a legendary weapon to bond to, giving it a value of a whopping 100 points over Boreas, making it the most reliable and best DPS sword in the game. But with no reliable way to activate the unique effect, except for some niche cases, I'm hoping that it will stay banished in the Shadow Realm forever. I hope you learned something in this video. Stay tuned to this channel because we're going to be going over the sword's best mods and comparing Valiant and Avenging Overdrive in the near future. If you like this video, please leave a like, consider supporting the channel by subscribing or becoming a member. You can get my partner Flare that way. It looks a little something like this. Use creator code REVVYRAD in the Dauntless in-game store or the Epic Games store. Thank you all again so very much for watching, and I will see you on the Shattered Isles.